Here is Colorverse Gray. Now, looking at the swatch, I thought slate gray, and that is all the good that I can really say about this ink. This is so aggressive, it makes me not want to write at all. This is a 100% fail as a fountain pen ink to me.
The pen for today is a Pelikan M1000. And now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how we got there by looking at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
Looking at the color on the page, we do get a very nice pain gray tone. Now, it doesn't feather and it doesn't spread. It even has little bits of shading going on. The color itself on this paper, fantastic. Payne's gray is one of my favorite gray tones. Looking at the back of the page, red flags, bells and whistles going off with just how deep into the page this always gets. Now, it didn't bleed through and touch the page underneath, but for crying out loud, this is Clairfontaine, and I don't know that I would want to write on the back of the page with this.
More than one ink. So let's take a look at a few other inks.
Here is Colorverse Cotton Blue. Here is Colorverse Andromeda. Here is Colorverse Albert. Here is Colorverse Pillars of Creation.
The second writing sample is done in a Portage Reporter notebook.
Here we can see we get the same tone of Clairfontaine. Does it feather? Does it not feather anywhere? This is horrific. This is the thing nightmares are made of. This is nightmare fuel. I'm going to sort of leave this one at this because at this amount of feathering, who cares about the rest? As we would expect, there's no writing on the back of the page because of the extreme. I don't know. This is really deep into the page all the time. Horrible. The only thing it didn't do was bleed through and touch the page underneath.
There's a lot to be learned by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down to immediately put into water to show the separation of those colors making the ink. Now, the one on the right is marked with a D. This is allowed to dry for 10 minutes before it's put into water. The third writing sample is done in a national brand Steno notebook.
Here the tone is just a little bit lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine. Now, again, feathering all over the place. I challenge you to tell me where on here there are not feathers or feathers that are incredibly out of control. I don't care about the rest of what's going on because this is more than distracting. Looking at the back of the page, you can see that my note was all bleed all the time. This is nightmare fuel.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Now, the smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. In the upper left, you can see where there is highlighter. In the upper right, that is pen flush. The lower left has a 1/3 bleach solution, and the lower right has plain old water. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook.
At least here we see the same tone as the Clairfontaine. There's the good thing I got to say about it. Now let's take a look for feathering. Feather. There's feather. This is horrible. What the hell? You know, if you do something really bad and the world doesn't know about it yet, you don't have to show it to the world. Why would you release an ink that does so poorly? Looking at the back of the page, the only good thing I can say is that it didn't bleed through touching the page underneath. But there's no writing back here. Of course, the writing on the front was really unreadable anyway. Colorverse, you can say no to releasing an ink.
With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at a few more gray inks that you can find the reviews of on this channel.
Here is Krishna Pencil. Here is Mont Blanc Spider. Here is Pannonia Zugmo Lichen. Here is Sailor Kobe number 46 Museum Gray.
All of the inks that you just saw have a review here on the channel. Now, the next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook.
Here we see the same tone as the Clairfontaine, and it really shows a great need to be using paper like this in these types of reviews, because we get no feather, no spread. We do get shading, better shading than we had on the Clairfontaine. This is the best performance that I've found on this ink. It is the only paper that you could probably use this ink on. Looking at the back of the page, your eyes do not deceive you. It is not bleeding. It is not ghosting. It is giving good performance. So we found one.
While it's nice to see inks that are in the same color family, I prefer to find inks that complement the color on the page. Here is Mont Blanc BMW. Here is Robert Oster Chocolate. Here is Diamine Umber. Here is Sailor Studio 223. The best way you can support this or any channel that you like watching is to alert the retailer of where you saw the product at time of purchase. Now, the last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
Here the tone is a whole lot lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine. It does feather, as we've seen everywhere, all the time. All feathers all the time. It is the Big Bird network of inks on papers. We only found one really where it really worked. Does it spread? Sure, who cares? I mean, the amount of feathering makes it renders what you're writing unusable. I looking at the back of the page, there is no writing back here because of how deep this ink always got. I had to throw the page out from underneath. The amount of bleeding was just too much. It was out of control. This is not a good ink for this paper.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
The Pelikan M1000 Fine Nib is a wet pen, so maybe the wetness is at fault here. So off camera, I tried this in a very dry fine. Nope, this ink is garbage. I wouldn't ink this in any pen, ever.